I'm curious to understand the metrics that you're using to identify success or failure. Pipeline and revenue, of course. What else are you monitoring to see if what you're launching is sticking?
Yeah, more than anything, it's engagement and adoption. And it's, are people using it and continuing to use it? Are they finding value in it? And in all these things, we're really focused on taking all this raw material you have through all the business conversations your company is having with all of your customers, all of your prospects, all of your candidates, all of your partners. And then how can we, based on what is happening in those conversations, using that AI capability to mine that, and then feeding you back insights to help you run a better business.
The product and engineering team has been crushing it, and your sellers now have 3 new features and a brand new product to sell. Buyers are going to love it, and customers have been asking for these features for months. You should be seeing the number of deals featuring that new product tick up week after week, but it's more of a trickle than a flood. Checking conversational intelligence turns up painfully few mentions of the features, and a couple times the talk track around the new product is just plain wrong. This is a serious form of revenue leak. On this episode of the Run Revenue Show, Craig Walker digs into the best ways to stop that leak by creating and maintaining velocity when bringing new features and products to market. Craig is a multi-time founder in the telecom space, and he spent the last 13 years as the founder and CEO of Dialpad, where he's been a product-focused leader with a knack for building exceptional revenue teams.
Hey, Kyle, one quick thing, if I can grab a minute. What's going on, everybody? Devin Reed here, sales pro turned head of content here at Clary. And I want to take a quick second to invite you to our brand new virtual event. It's called Charge. Charge is a virtual event filled with thought leadership and practical advice for revenue pros who want to turn obstacles into opportunities, regardless of market conditions. This is a half-day virtual event that starts with a keynote. It has leadership track, it has a practitioner track, and the content is highly relevant, highly actionable, and it's all about finding new ways to win in 2023. If you attend, you will get the blueprint for running revenue in 2023 and see what's really working in today's climate from the boardroom to the front line. Hurry up. Registration is completely free. You can sign up now. The event is happening on June 6th. Hope to see you there. Kyle, back over to you.
I'm Kyle Coleman, sales pro turned SVP of marketing at Clary. Run Revenue is the show where revenue pros learn to stop revenue leak, achieve revenue precision, and grow their companies and careers.
This is Run Revenue Show with Kyle Coleman.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Run Revenue Show. I am thrilled to be joined today by Craig Walker, founder and CEO of Dialpad. Craig, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Psyched to be here.
We are talking today all about how to match sales velocity to product velocity, a really interesting topic, and we're going to dig into that. But first, I want to give the audience a little bit of a rundown of where you've been, Craig. You have been running a Dialpad-esque company for, it seems like, 25 years now. So I want to rewind the clock all the way to 2001, where you founded Dialpad Communications, which was acquired, I believe, by Yahoo. You then ran Yahoo Voice. You then jumped over to Grand Central Communications and then to Google and ran Google Voice in the 2007, 2008 sort of range. You were, I believe, for a few years until about 2010 when you refounded Dialpad, and again, founder, CEO, and you've been at this version of Dialpad for, I believe, since 2010, so 13 years now. What'd I miss?
Yeah, that's right. I think you gave me credit for founding the original Dialpad Communications. I didn't. I was a CEO, but I came in from a venture fund and we had invested in Dialpad Communications. But I did run it for 4 years, and then we got acquired by Yahoo, and then founded Grand Central that got acquired by Google, and then this one.
It's super interesting. And so I want to start here, Craig, by talking to you about how you assess product market fit. You've been in this space for 20 plus years, not your first rodeo. You were super early on the VoIP telephony sort of, maturity curve. What was your approach, and what is your approach to assessing product market fit?
Yeah, so I think I'm really good at it in the communication space. Any other space, I'd probably be terrible. This is the only thing I'm good at, but I've been doing it for 20 plus years, like you said. The thing that was the most interesting to me on product market fit in the communication space is that I get to be a consumer of the product as well. So I don't need a focus group. I am patient zero on virtually everything. And that's what we did when I was in a venture fund in 2000 and we invested in Dialpad the first time. Like you could tell, hey, all of a sudden this voice over IP technology is going to allow people who are not giant worldwide telcos like AT&Ts of the world to go compete in the communication space. And up until that time, it was impossible to do that. So you can realize, okay, now all of a sudden you've unleashed engineers with the ability to go make a better communications product than AT&T and Verizon and all these people who had the luxury of being monopolists. And so they got really lazy on things like user delight and value and experience. And so it was just super exciting. And then I was able to be patient zero when we started Grand Central, at the time, going back in time, this was 2006, but you'd have a home phone number with a voicemail system. You had a work number with a voicemail system. You had a cell phone number with a voicemail system, and cell phone was so expensive that you didn't just default to that for everything. So you had this problem of having 3 different inboxes to check and all these different things. So Grand Central was really, we were going to give you one phone number that would ring you on all those endpoints, but keep everything and all your features in one little area, which became Google Voice and then on. So it's been really easy because, again, like now in this iteration of Dialpad, and it's a different company. We just bought the name back from Yahoo. But we're a business. We're a growing B2B SaaS business. We have sales teams. We have support teams. We have recruiting teams. We have meeting needs, messaging needs, phone needs. And so we've been able to be the first station on all this stuff. And if our employees love it and delighted by it, then we have customers who love it, then we believe it's a pretty good fit and we push forward. And we're pretty, the nice thing is we can move fast with a nimble, modern platform. So it allows us to change. If we do something, get it wrong, we'll adjust and fix it.
You read my mind, Craig. I was going to ask, you've been at startups, multiple sizes, multiple sort of series. You've been at large companies, Yahoo and Google, although they weren't nearly as large in the early 2000s, mid-2000s, obviously, as they are now. But you made the decision to go back the startup route. Talk to me a little bit about why. I have to imagine that this agility, this ability to kind of think and act quickly is a major part of it, but curious to hear your answer.
Yeah. So that's exactly right. Being able to get stuff done and being able to be the final decision maker. Again, that's part of the way you get things done is you have someone who can make a call and then you just run toward it. The problem with these massive companies, it's really hard to find that one person who can make the call and so it's like you spend a lot of time on these middle management, cross-team collaboration meetings and arguing for priorities, and other people argue for their priorities and who gets the resources you don't know. And sometimes it works great and everyone's fully aligned, and sometimes it doesn't work great and it takes a long time to get stuff done. And for me, in both cases, when I left, it's just like, look, I know what I want to do next. I'd love to be able to do it here, but if if it can take me 3 years to do 1 year's worth of work, things move too fast. We got to be on the front end of this. So I decided to leave and go back to this. Every day in a startup, I've never once had a day that seemed too long or that I didn't look forward to going to work. And I hate to say it, a couple times at those big companies, there were days I didn't look forward to going to work.
I know exactly what you mean, Craig. I knew at my previous company, we were about to be acquired by Google, and I was aware of this pending acquisition. I was like, I don't want any part of that. Our company was 800 people and it felt big. It's like, imagine that times 1,000 or times 100, whatever it would be. And so I totally hear you. And now this is a perfect segue to the meat of today's show, which is product velocity, sales velocity, go-to-market velocity. How big is Dialpad now?
So employee-wise, we're a little over 1,100.
1,100. That's not a, early stage startup. You're edging into mature company territory here. So it must be a challenge to maintain this mindset and maintain the output from a product velocity standpoint. How do you all approach it at Dialpad?
The nice thing is, like, my chief product officer was my co-founder at Grand Central. We worked together at Google Voice together. We worked together at Yahoo together. We worked together at Dialpad 1 together. My chief technology officer was the engineering lead on Google Voice. We've worked together for 16 years. So at this point, on the product side, they know, our cadence. They know we will move quickly as things become available. Like the topic du jour of ChatGPT being, made publicly available and accessible via APIs. Man, overnight, that made a lot of products way better.
Yeah.
anything should be summarized and analyzed after the fact. So we started focusing on that like immediately the day it became available. Yeah, it's kind of a bummer for other long-term roadmap items. And some people have a hard time adjusting to like, their priorities changing, but it's a super competitive advantage for the company that can make those and still keep the employees, happy and motivated and engaged. But it's just kind of been part of our DNA forever. And when you have, I don't know, like the top three guys on the product side, myself, the head of product and the head of engineering, all aligned on that, it flows pretty well. The one thing that I found is it's not harder to make things quicker. It's harder to make sure everyone understands them and knows what we're launching and why, and how you communicate to 1,000 people or 1,100 people who are on 7 different countries, and you got to repeat yourself over and over and over again. And like, I think I saw Eric wanted Zoom say, he's like, look, by the time I say it the 20th time, people start to get it.
That's right.
And so that's really, really true. You just have to be very, very deliberate in how you communicate about it and continue to repeat it.
You mentioned velocity as a competitive advantage. This is something that separates you from the competition. This is a muscle that you have that really can and should be a superpower. But if your sellers can't actually sell it, if they're not enabled to speak to the product value, if they're not up to speed with what's coming, what's next, if they can't sell the future effectively, then all of that product velocity is for naught. So how are you making sure that your field has everything that they need to keep up with the velocity that's coming out of your product org?
I'd say the lucky or good news about us is a lot of the products and features that we're coming out with, our sellers are using internally. So, we add a new AI feature that summarizes all your calls and gives you a sales quality score and tracks the next steps. They've used that, and then like they're our alpha testers, right? We do things internally first, and then we run it to an EAP program, and then we go general. And so in this case, a lot of times our sellers are familiar with the products because they use them. So that's good. But in other ones where they're not, like in a contact center, like they're not contact center agents, obviously. So then we lean on our enablement team heavily. And we just hired a fantastic head of enablement who literally just started 2 days ago on Monday. But enablement's a big piece, and that enablement working really closely with product marketing is a big piece, and product marketing working really close with product management to make sure that they describe it right and understand how it works and why, and how do you like synthesize that down to like the frontline sellers who aren't going to have, all day to give a demo and talk through it. They maybe have 30 seconds to describe the value. It's a really interesting process of coming up with the idea, testing it, thinking it's successful, building, prototyping it, using it, pushing it through product marketing and then enablement and then down to the sellers, and then certifying them on it, making sure they know how to do it. And then where I want to get to is like do these thematic kind of like sales processes of, okay, hey, Monday morning before we kick off, it's going to be like Hill Street Blues, and get the whole team together. We're going to talk about the topic of the week. We're going to refresh everyone's memory on it. And then bam, we're going to go hit it and sell that week all day, every day. By the end of that week, it's fully ingrained inside you. And then you'll never forget it, for the rest of your career. And then you just kind of continually do that. Maybe have SEs come in and give demos, to refresh things over the time. But it is a never ending process. Some SE or some AEs pick things up really quickly. Some, rely on things that have worked on the past, and you hear them like going back to an old pitch and like, these old crutches of things that had worked in the past. So we really got to be on top of it. It's a real job. But one of the cool things is, again, with all this new real-time artificial intelligence stuff too, we can track, are they going through the playbook that we want them to? And we can get an automated score of who's following it and who isn't, who's saying what. And so the feedback loop or the coaching tools are getting better and better and better to be able to measure that and reinforce that.
So you mentioned product managers, you mentioned product marketing, you mentioned enablement, you mentioned the field, but you also mentioned Eric Yuan at Zoom, CEO of Zoom. And I'm curious to get your perspective on what your role is, Craig. You've got a million things going on. You've got board, you've got exec meetings, you've got strategic things, but what is your role in making sure that the new product that's getting rolled out and the messaging that goes out with it is right and is compelling and is adopted by the field.
I think every CEO is a certain type of a CEO. There's a CEO who used to be a sales guy and is going to gravitate toward crushing sales.
Yep.
CEOs used to be CFOs, and they're really focused on efficiencies and operational issues and things like that. And then there's CEOs, maybe who are marketers, or CEOs, in my case, who came up as product guys. And I obsess over the product. The other thing that I like to do is spend time with customers. I really enjoy hearing how they're using it, because you have these grand ideas of what it is and why it's better. There's nothing better than going and talking to a customer and hearing their experiences with it and getting great feedback on that. There's a product-centric CEO like me and my head of product, Vincent Paquet. We've worked together for 23 years now. We'll talk about priorities. We'll talk about new features. We'll talk about new lines of business and new SKUs. And we'll have in our mind why we're doing that. What's the ROI, or why would a customer care? Because one of the challenges of a real product-led company is sometimes you have so many features and so many things that the sellers just talk about the features. Like, hey, it can do this, it can do that, it can do this, it can do that. But they forget to tie it back to why would the buyer care and how's it going to make their life. We try to build that into our entire, almost the PRD when we're writing out the product requirements document. And this is why it matters. And this is why someone would care about this. And this is how the persona who would actually be the buyer, the beneficiary of that, and how you talk to them. So that's where I spend my time. I love going on sales calls. I love going on QBRs with the customer success team, but I really love spending time with the design team and the product team.
What I really love about that, Craig, is that what we are realizing at Clary is that more and more unexpected personas are logging into and using Clary's product. And one of the main groups that we've seen are product managers. They truly are revenue critical if the team forces them to think that way. If they are thinking of themselves, not necessarily as just a PM, but as more of a GM, a general manager of the product line that they support. It sounds like that's the mindset that you have built, the DNA that you have built across your product team. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, super fair assessment, because a lot of times in the past, it's hard. Like when you're building from scratch, you have all these foundational pieces of look, we have to build this to be able to do these other things. So you don't really spend the time to say, okay, well, was that successful? What is the adoption rate? Whatever, because it's foundational. But now that we're adding things onto it, a big part of the product manager's job is, hey, in your launch plan, and we have pretty detailed launch plan that goes through all the stuff, what it's going to say on the web, all those types of what's the pricing, everything flows through. And one of them is, what are your targets of adoption? What are your targets for success? First month, first quarter, first year targets. And then let's look back and make sure that we're tracking to those. And if not, we'll do something else. And we had a pretty good example recently where we launched a product, and the way we launched it wasn't awesome. We'd sent out a bunch of emails to all our customers and said, okay, if you want to use this, raise your hand and sign up and we'll turn it on for you and then give us your feedback. And, we'd spent a lot of time building this pretty killer product, and the number of people who raised their hand was pretty small. And then we just realized it wasn't anything to do with the product. It was just the way we were communicating with them. So what we did is we basically turned it on for everyone for free. And then after a quarter or so, we said, hey, did you like that? Okay, now that you've been using it and liked it, it's going to become a paid product. Would you like to continue using it? And then lo and behold, the adoption rate was dramatically higher than the other thing. And so it's kind of figuring out the best way to get that information or to give the product the highest likelihood of success. And that was a model that worked really well.
Was that your first foray into this kind of product-led sales motion, the freemium motion, or did Dialpad have that DNA before?
We had it from day one. The first product we built was a conferencing product called Uber Conference. If we launched it, we won TechCrunch Disrupt 2012 with Uber Conference. And it was just a much better conferencing product. And that had a freemium component to it. And at the time, we even did, as we were ramping up, it was the first thing we ever launched. And there was a lot of demand. So we ended up building almost the velvet rope type of waiting list and excitement of getting people into it. So that's always been part of it, where you can pretty much buy any of our products online. Virtually all of them come with a 2-week trial. We want people to be able to go kick the tires and see if they love it. Sometimes our sales guys don't like that because they want to make sure that they're involved in the sales process and they're, selling as big of a land as possible. I get that, but I also get the point of, look, people are web savvy and they want to go try things. They can tell they're sophisticated, make it good enough, they'll like it. And we've picked up some really interesting large customers that way where, the IT team will get 5 trial licenses and play with it. And by the time we go to sell them, they're already sold. So it kind of cuts both ways. I always like that product-led growth piece.
The product-led sales, the product-led growth thing is super important. And what you just hit on, Craig, is that some sellers are not necessarily going to be on board. But guess what? We need to sell our products in the way that buyers want to buy, not necessarily the way that our sellers want to sell. And there's probably some middle ground that we're going to strike, some compromise that we can make. But there's a really interesting principle that we're seeing right now that is compelling buyers to buy, which is you need to take risk off the table for them. Whatever you can do to make sure that they know that when they buy something, they're buying something valuable, that's easy to implement, easy to roll out, and that everything you're promising and the beautiful messaging, positioning, product marketing work you've done is actually true. And this is really important for you, obviously, because I think you mentioned that you have this ongoing initiative where you're launching 20 new features in 20 weeks. Is that still true?
I came to our marketing team and said, we're going to consolidate them one a month for 12 months, but it'll be one launch a month. There'll be more than one feature. You hit the nail on the head because nothing proves de-risking a product and proving that it's easy to use and set up than letting someone go do it on their own.
Right.
Right. And it's, like the idea of you can only implement this if my pro services team is fully engaged, making sure that you don't screw it up. I mean, obviously on big deals, we have a pro service team and we make sure that everything's right. But at the end of the day, even those biggest companies should be able to go spin it up and try it and see if it's working the way they anticipate. And I think one of the benefits for just our own DNA at Dialpad is we came from the consumer side. Mm-hmm. Google Voice, consumer app, and Yahoo Voice was a consumer app, Grand Central was consumer, Dialpad One was consumer. And when it's a consumer product, you don't have an IT person coaching them and telling them how to do it. You got to make it dead simple. They got to see the value really, really quickly. They got to be able to use it really, really quickly. And you got to care about delight and care about, great design. And that was one of the reasons we moved into the business or the enterprise communication space, because design has been such an afterthought and usability has been such an afterthought for so long. We started the company in 2010. And at that time I was working at Google. I think I had an Avaya phone on my desk, with 16 buttons and all these lights and extensions and stuff. No way in the world. Here we are launching, Google Voice to consumers. And yet this giant Fortune 500 company, Google, is using this archaic crap that no one can figure out how it works. And that really was the spark of going into this and making a better business communication thing. So the nice thing is we get to compete against people who have in their DNA that hideous background. So it's kind of we look forward to competing with them.
The bar is low. And as a Corgi owner, I can appreciate that. We want the bar as low enough that my dog can jump over it. So I'm really glad to hear that. Now, back to this point on the product-led strategy. And you have a really interesting example here is one of the pitfalls that many companies will fall into here is they know that there's some sort of virtue in product-led sales and product-led growth. And they say, okay, yeah, we can do this. And they just roll out a new feature and they expect people to adopt it. But the fact of the matter is it has to be a guided process. You just hit on it. You need to, inject some B2C DNA into the way that you're designing your product, training, self-guided education, whatever it may be. And you had this really interesting new feature rollout where I think you said that every week you were sending leaderboard updates, not to the individual users, but to their managers. What was that product? And fill in the details of how you led or increased adoption.
Yes, we developed a product called AI CSAT. So it was for a customer support product. So we have a version for sales teams, but a version for inbound support primarily. And the way support teams are generally judged or measured is, one of them is what level of customer satisfaction you have. The other is, how efficient are you? How quickly can you answer the question? How many times do you answer the question on the first call so the guy doesn't have to come back and be unhappy and also take up more resources? So the AI CSAT was this great innovation because without a CSAT scoring every call, the only way a company can get a CSAT measure is to ask the customer to stay on the call after the call's over to answer some questions. And legitimately, anyone who wants to stay on the phone longer after a customer support call is a particular type of person, right? So you get this selective bias of the person who wants to stay on and answer questions about how good his call was. And you end up with getting like single digit response rates.
Yeah.
And you also end up like self-selecting either the most joyously happy people because their issue was solved, they want to tell the world about it, or the super unhappy person whose issue wasn't solved and he wants to yell about it. So you get like a ton of scores of 1 and a ton of scores of 5, and the other 9+% you don't get to hear from. And so that was the state of the art until, very recently. And so we launched this AI CSAT, and we now can get a rating, a CSAT score based on every single call. So now you get 100% and it's much more accurate. So that's great. But the idea that, when we built that, the original idea was, hey, the supervisor will know, or the manager will know, and will go into the analytics section of the website and run reports and be able to see this. And then after a while, you realize humans are humans, and no matter how well-intentioned, a good portion of them don't do that. So what we ended up doing is we said, look, instead of relying on that guy to do it, let's do it for him and just send it to him every Friday or every Sunday, actually. And let's stack rank their team members, the guys who were their agents on that call center, by CSAT. And they're stack ranked from the highest to the lowest every week. And then I can see a guy at the very bottom who's dragging down my average and hurting my bonus and my comp because I get comped on average CSAT. And I can click on that guy. I can see all the bad calls, see the parts, because we'll transcribe it all to text and pull out and show you what went wrong. And now you have something you can actually coach on and you can actually improve. That was another big epiphany of make it easy on these guys. Don't build a product where they have to go turn into Sherlock Holmes to figure it out. Literally just hand it to them on a silver platter of here is your best, here's your worst. Aren't you glad you now know this without having to do any work? And by the way, if you want to go improve them, here's all you got to do. Go click this link and then you can go do it. That increased adoption a ton just by doing that little bit.
That's evidence of, going back to what you mentioned earlier, Craig, that PRD, the product requirements doc, and you really thinking about what are the workflows that we are solving here? Not what are the features that we're building. That's obviously upstream, but what are the actual use cases and how are people going to actually use this product in the wild? And it sounds like you've really thought that through and solved a pretty bespoke use case here pretty comprehensively. That's very impressive. My next question for you is, you're rolling out all these new features, 12 new bundles of features over the next 12 months. We'll talk about that more in a moment here. But I'm curious to understand the metrics that you're using to identify success or failure. Pipeline and revenue, of course, are the North Star, but sometimes they can be lagging indicators. So what else are you monitoring to see if what you're launching is sticking?
Yeah, more than anything, it's engagement and adoption. That's kind of the leading indicator to revenue. And it's, are people using it and continuing to use it? Are they finding value in it? And in all these things, we're really focused on taking all this raw material you have through all the business conversations your company is having with all of your customers, all of your prospects, all of your candidates, all of your partners. Those are all going through this communication platform. And then how can we, based on what is happening in those conversations, using that AI capability to mine that, and then feeding you back insights to help you run a better business. And if we can do that, we're adding value to everyone. We're helping you run a better sales team. We're helping you ramp your new sales reps quicker. Everyone would want their sales reps to ramp quicker. I know my CFO would love to find a way to shave a month off the ramp when you're talking about a lot of guys. That affects the model a lot. Same thing on support. We launched this AI powered chatbot that had this semantic search capability to search your entire knowledge base. So no matter what question you ask it, it can just provide you an answer from the entire knowledge base, as opposed to normal chatbots where they program answers to the top FAQs, but anything more esoteric, you had to ask a live agent, right? And so when we rolled that out, we found that, on average, people were saving between seeing ticket deflection of 18 to 23%.
Wow.
If you can take out 18 to 23% of my customer support cost, That's amazing. And if you can give my tier one people the ability to answer more questions before referring them to tier two, who are more expensive, that's really valuable. So really tracking the adoption of new features is the biggest thing. And then obviously we charge for them and we see how much revenue we get out of them and how many people add on, what's the attach rate and things like that. But don't even worry about those things until you have adoption solved.
What is the instrumentation that your AMs, your CSMs, your AEs have to understand those adoption metrics, that 18 to 23% ticket deflection rate as an example? I have to imagine that part of the sales motion is taking that data point and surfacing it back up to whoever's the budget holder, CFO, CRO, whoever it may be. Is everybody enabled for that kind of self-service data orchestration?
This goes back to your question. How do we get them all making the same pitches and doing the right things? And it's a never ending process, right?
Yeah.
Because we'll want to arm you with case studies and proof points and ROI analysis. And then depending on who you're talking to, the right ones for the right persona or the right case study for the right industry segment or vertical to make it relevant. I mean, there's a lot of work in doing that. Nothing has better credibility than having a happy customer being able to, say what they saved and this truly worked and this really improved how they do it. Similar to Clary, just to give you guys a prop, we've started using Clary, I don't know, 9 months ago or so. Our quarterly forecast, now we see it and I don't know how we lived without it. It's one of those things, which is what we want to do in all of our products too, of hey, we're going to give you insights into things that you were kind of guessing at and trying to get. And now we're going to make it really clear and obvious. And those types of products are delightful. And I guarantee you, when you guys were selling us Clary, you probably had some great case studies for customers similar to us, similar size, similar industry, what have you. And they were able to forecast much more predictably, and they were able to, see where things were falling short and how to take corrective measures. And it's the exact same way here. And just, we're selling the same thing. We're selling to IT, we're selling to support, we're selling to sales, selling to business leaders and the CFO even, and having those types of stories that are really verifiable and backed up by a customer, their goal. So we spent a lot of time harvesting that.
Beautiful, beautiful. So now let's transition to this monthly launch cadence that you have. Your marketing team convinced you that the weekly launch maybe wasn't the most fruitful. So now you're going to the monthly launch. And I know something else that you're thinking a lot about, Craig, is your overall revenue process and the cadence by which you run that revenue process. So I'm curious to understand how these product launch moments marry up with other revenue moments across your quarterly cadence.
We do have a model of we're going to launch, we're going to hopefully clearly explain the value and have our sellers be able to explain the value, being able to get press and talk about it ourselves clearly. And then we're going to get it out in customers' hands, and then we're going to monetize it once they've been able to use it and see the value themselves. And again, I think this comes from that product-led growth and the consumer background of, hey, it's a lot easier to sell to someone once they've already seen the value of it than trying to pitch them on the value while closing them. I would always prefer to give someone a product and have them fall in love with it and then give them a call and the other way around. So what we've seen and just kind of the prior couple launches, after that beta or trial period, then we turn it in, turn it on to sell, and the SDRs or the AEs, the account managers go back and add to original order. You see a really nice spike of ARR. And then as your base grows and you continue to add more, it continues to grow. So as we model it out, each one of those launches will have a little bit of an increasing ARR tail to it. And you put them all together after 12 months, hopefully those add up to a pretty meaningful new ARR just on a new product.
I love that. So you're able to start with the product launch cadence, know what your product team velocity is able to do, know what your go-to-market team velocity is able to do. And then you can work in the weekly or monthly forecast calls, your deal inspections, your one-on-ones at whatever level, your FLMs to individual reps or your VPs with FLMs or whatever it is. And you can start to have a pretty comprehensive and predictable view of the business. Is that a fair way to stitch it all together?
That is fair. And it also increases your win rate and your expansion rate too. And so it gives you a lot more comfort when we're getting beat up on price with someone who doesn't have that launch cadence. I got no problem saying, look, we'll get close to their price on the basics. We'll match what they, then we'll get a It exposes you to all these other things that they can't do. And I'm willing to bet that once you're exposed to them, you're willing to pay for them because they're not just underlying like a phone rang. It actually allows you to understand what's going on in business and help you be more successful. And so yeah, these things give you just other arrows in the quiver to be able to say, okay, even if you don't make a big splash on the land, you have all these other opportunities down the road to make it a much more profitable customer.
And adding on to that, Craig, the other thing that this does, this product velocity, is it is just an always on swagger injection for your field sellers.
Wow.
When they know that there's something else coming, something valuable, truly valuable coming that's been well vetted, that has the right research, the right market intelligence, whatever it may be, and is going to be genuinely useful to the folks you're selling to, they're confident in those conversations. Yeah. They're confident in negotiations. They don't have to do the race to the bottom from a pricing standpoint because you're injecting that confidence in them with the product velocity.
Exactly. And it's great because there's never a dull moment. They're never sitting around wondering what to do next. There's always something they're talking about.
Right. Super valuable. All right, my friend. Well, we are edging up on time here. So I have one more bonus question for you. You are clearly a student of the game, product led. You're totally plugged in on all things on the revenue side as well. What would be a book that you would recommend for other executives? It could be fiction, it could be nonfiction, whatever it may be. But curious, what's been influential for you?
It's funny. I was recently just rereading Fanatical Prospecting, just to reread it and get fired up before our sales kickoff. That's a really good question. I think of more kind of like the Steve Jobs mentality of, if I ask my customers what they'd want, they're like the Ford one. If I ask my customers what they want, they'd say a faster horse. And so I generally don't take a lot of inspiration from like other leaders. The one that does really impress me is I try to be like a CEO of a bigger company is Frank Slutman's book, Amp It Up. He's the king. Him and Mike Scarpelli are like the best 1-2 punch on the planet. And what they did at ServiceNow and Data Domain and now at Snowflake, it's hard as a CEO not to read that book. It's like, I am fired up to work tomorrow and make sure everyone is as fired up as I am. I think that more than anything gives you a lot of confidence to just go do what needs to be done. I thought that was probably the best business book I've read.
Absolutely love it. I'm fired up after this conversation. Craig Walker, CEO of Dialpad, thank you so much for the time. We really appreciate it.
Right on. Thank you very much.
Don't let what you heard today go to waste. Take 2 minutes to download today's checklist to get your priorities in line for the week. You can find that linked in our show notes. And if you liked what you heard, make sure you give us a 5-star rating and leave a review. We'll be back next Monday with more to help you win your week.